Hello, and welcome to That's Rich, where I talk about random stuff, pop culture, sports, politics, trivia, whatever. So, here today to talk about Russian Doll, the Netflix series starring Natasha Lyonne, and it's a firecracker. Loved it. And specifically, I wanted to kind of dive in and talk about the New York centricity of it because um, I lived in New York for 7 years. It's kind of where I grew into myself. I'm here in Houston, Texas now, and Houston, Texas is where I grew up. I left Houston, Texas as my first home, but New York is kind of where I felt like I grew into myself, like I said. And when you kind of grow into yourself in New York City, when you get used to living there, there's a kind of way of living you get used to, and it's a very claustrophobic, kind of self-contained, myopic way of living. And I think that the way that the series is shot really reflects that well. It's very claustrophobic, shot in closed spaces, and even the exterior shots and stuff outside feels very self-contained, very closed knit, and I think that that reflects also kind of, it's sad to say, like kind of a little narcissism when you're in New York. It's kind of like the whole world revolves around you. It's like I'm in New York, I'm doing my thing, and that was nice. I kind of like that, and at the same time, I think what's so nice about the series is it's so heartfelt. Because it starts out seeming like it's going to be a little bit more of a just a high concept series with a premise that's a little bit more cerebral, but it ends up being a pretty heartfelt story, and it ends up being a love story, which was near and dear to my heart. I won't get into too many details, but I think that what's interesting about the series is that it's not afraid to delve into the abstract, not just in terms of the narrative, but in terms of the visuals. And I think one of the things that people struggle with a lot, and what people sometimes have trouble taking risks with, is visual metaphors and the ambiguous in terms of the cinema. And that's why I think it's really important that shows like this exist, because it leaves little visual puzzles to leave in your brain kind of bouncing around, and you say, okay, well, I don't know what that means, but that's okay. I'm going to let that sit, and kind of just the visuals are fun to play around with, and just like I'm going to let that visual sit, and I'm just going to enjoy it. Especially the ending. I'm not going to give it away, obviously, but the final shot is just wonderful, and there are all sorts of little references that I found fun. Like for example, I mean the main conceit. First of all, I think we should talk about that. The main conceit of the show, if you haven't read about it yet, is that Natasha Lyonne plays 36-year-old computer programmer. She's based in the East Village, and she's at a birthday party, her own, on her 36th birthday, and it's kind of a posh upscale party. And she decides to leave it and go hook up with some random guy, and she ends up getting hit by a car and killed. And rather than die forever, she ends up back at the same bathroom where she started the show. The first shot is in a bathroom, and it ends up being kind of like a purgatory thing where she relives her death over and over again and goes back to the same spot. So it's kind of like a Groundhog Day premise, Bill Murray movie, 1993, right? And you start to think, it's not going to be a ripoff, is it, right? But trust me, it's not. And you could tell that Groundhog Day was probably an influence, but no way is that where it stops. It's much headier and much more ambitious, which is not at all a knock, by the way, on the Harold Ramis movie and Bill Murray star vehicle, because I love Groundhog Day. It's a great film. It's more of a kind of a straight up pop movie, and it's not a knock on it at all, because Groundhog Day is great for what it is. But this is much more ambitious, much more cerebral, and much more metaphysical. And so it uses that as kind of a launch point, and from there, takes some interesting twists and turns. And it takes about 3 or 4 episodes for it to really take off. So if you find yourself wondering like what the heck is going on after the first 2 episodes, don't give up. Trust me. And like I said, I mean the New York centricity of it really appealed to me. Especially kind of the East Village locales. It's weird because the party is very 21st century. There's obviously a lot of modern um, vibes to it, but at the same time, when she goes outside and kind of goes into the seedier parts of the East Village, it's a harken back to kind of a um, a begone part of the East Village as something that doesn't really exist anymore, or at least it's kind of more in pockets. I mean, I saw a little bit of it when I moved there in 2007, but it was already dying, and kind of like the weirder East Village where you saw drag queens around every corner, and seedier clubs where it was kind of cool to just go around and hang around more interesting people. It wasn't quite as gentrified. And yeah, so there was a little bit more of a harkening back to that. And what else did I want to say about it? Oh, yes. So the element about the love story. So without getting too deeply into it, like it's a little cheesy sounding, but I fell in love in New York City. I met my wife there, and it was weird because I was going through a rough time when I first moved to New York City. I was in grad school, and I was trying to date, and it wasn't really working out. But when I met my wife, I mean, there was this weird sense of like things weirdly working out. We just kind of clicked, even though we were very different people from very different backgrounds, and things just kind of came together, and it worked. Things just worked for us. And there's a sense that time kind of stopped. I know that's a cliche, right? But what I mean by that is more just like the feel, oh my God, this moment is frozen in time. There's a sense that we were there for each other. We were made to help each other, to kind of guide each other, to help each other. Like she rescued me, I rescued her in a way. And this show gets into that in, it takes that kind of associative concept and makes it literal without getting too deeply into it. And that's what the fun part of the show is. So take that for what it's worth, and I'll leave it at that. There's also, like I said, a lot of pop culture references that are interesting. Some of the one, like when Natasha Lyonne, each time she dies and goes back to the bathroom, I won't give it away, but the musical choice they have to lead into her leaving the bathroom every time is perfect. It's ironic. It's hilarious. It's wonderful. Musical choices are wonderful throughout. And cinematically, I mean, just some tangential ones that I don't know were intentional. I mean, people have talked about some of the ones that are more obvious, but interestingly, some of the exterior shots that I thought of, like there's this movie called Naked from 1993. It's a movie by British director Mike Leigh, who has kind of an interesting method of working with actors. He has kind of like a bare bones script, and then he gets together with the actors and kind of generates the script through improv. And this movie Naked is about a character who's a pretty cerebral character named Johnny, and played by David Thewlis, who's one of my favorite actors. And he kind of wanders around nocturnal London, like the middle of the night, and kind of just randomly digresses and chats with, people in the street and expounds on philosophy and whatever, and just kind of, bumbles around the streets of nocturnal London. And there was an element of that in this show at various times when Natasha Lyonne's character is kind of wandering around, and so it reminded me a lot of Naked in that way, and a lot of the visuals reminded me of Naked, the way the exteriors are shot at night. Also, the way Natasha Lyonne's hair looks, the curly red hair. Don't know if this was intentional at all. It just kept occurring to me. Maria Schneider in Last Tango in Paris, opposite Marlon Brando, directed by Bernardo Bertolucci in the 70s. Yeah, I mean, that image just kept cropping up in my mind. So, yeah, that was a couple other things that occurred to me. There's also a flashback at one point to the early 90s East Village. And interestingly, they play a song from the late 80s, so there's kind of an overlap there. I was wondering, like, is it out of time? Is that the right thing to do here? I won't say what song, but it is a pretty heartbreaking use of the song. And what else is there to talk about? Because it's just a pretty fascinating show all around. Natasha Lyonne, of course, performance is wonderful. She's perfect for the role. If you haven't seen her other stuff, she's been in Orange is the New Black. She's been in the American Pie series. But, she's very curmudgeonly, straight talking. And here she just has that kind of gruff voice appeal. She sounds like she's smoked about 50 packs of cigarettes every day. And, she's just going to, die probably at 50 of lung cancer. But and just like on a collision course with death at every turn, just having a death wish. Interesting choice of word considering the New York centricity of it. Death wish, 70s New York. But yeah, and there are all sorts, and she spouts all sorts of references to New York pop culture as well, like movies from the 70s and even before that in the movie. So that's kind of fun too. Yeah, so like I said, check it out. It's an awesome series. And it'll be interesting to see if they, do more of it, if they take it for a second season, or if they decide to just leave it as is, which they could do. I mean, it ends in a kind of ambiguous way, but that's fine. Like I said, I mean, ambiguity is totally fine. And like I said, the way it ends visually, ambiguous but wonderful. So I wouldn't be surprised if they don't do anything with it again, but if they did, I'd be up for watching more. So if you have any thoughts about that or any questions, feel free to comment. And if you do talk about the series in detail, please post a spoiler alert before you do that. And yeah, see you guys next time. Take care.